Yeah, for those who just joined us, we will wait one more minute and then I will welcome you all to our CTC hosted workshop to discuss the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our workshop to discuss the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, commonly known as CAPTI. My name is Matthew Yozgat, and I'm the Deputy Director of SB1 Programming at the California Transportation Commission. I oversee the SB1 programs at the Commission and will be guiding the conversation today with the support of Christine Gordon, who is one of my lead team members, and Kayla Giese, who is a program analyst. This will be a staff-led workshop similar to other commission workshops, but because the conversation today is of vital importance to each of the commissioners, they will be in attendance as well. We are currently joined by Chair Hillary Norton, Commissioner Michelle Martinez, Commissioner Leanne Eager, Commissioner Fran Inman, Commissioner Joe Tavallone, Commissioner Joe Liu, and Commissioner Rocco Davis. I will now turn it over to Christine to cover some workshop logistics.
Good afternoon. On the GoToWebinar system, please find the webinar panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. There you will find the Audio and Questions tab. Under the Audio tab, attendees will have the choice to listen in via the computer or telephone option. Should you prefer computer audio, please ensure the appropriate box is selected. If you choose the phone call option, select the corresponding box and dial the phone number, access code, and audio pin as directed by the automated system. Please note that if the audio pin is not entered, you will remain in listen-only mode and will be unable to speak to the audience should you have a comment. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link and phone number to access the webinar. These cannot be shared with other participants as they are registered to a specific attendee. There are two options for participants to provide comments on agenda topics. Using the Questions tab, type in the agenda topic you are commenting on in your comment. Commission staff will read the comment on your behalf. Alternatively, you may click on the hand icon to indicate you wish to make a comment. You will then be unmuted and called upon to make your comment. Please be sure to state your name and affiliation prior to voicing your remarks. Please do your best to be concise with your comments. Also, please make sure that your comments add new information. If you agree with the comments of a previous speaker, simply make that statement. Since we often have many speakers, we ask that you make your point in 3 minutes or less. You will not be able to be on camera while making comments. As a note, we will reserve the ability to take a 10-minute break around 3 p.m. if it seems as the workshop could go the full duration. With that, I'll turn it back over to Matthew Yozgat.
And Kayla, you can go to the next slide. Thank you, Christine. For those of you who are not familiar with the CAPTI or who may not participated in a CAPTI focused briefing or workshop to this point, I wanted to offer a very brief background. The CAPTI is the result of two executive orders signed by Governor Gavin Newsom, N1919 and N7920. Executive Order N1919 calls for the California State Transportation Agency, CalSTA, in coordination with the Department of Finance, to align the state's climate goals with transportation spending on planning, programming, and mitigation to achieve the objectives of the state's climate change scoping plan where feasible. Reduce vehicle miles traveled by statewide directing discretionary transportation investments in support of housing production near available jobs and in accordance with the state's smart growth principles as defined in Government Code Section 65041.1 and taking public health into account. to reduce congestion through innovative strategies designed to encourage people to shift from other modes of transportation, to fund transportation options that contribute to the overall health of Californians and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, such as transit, walking, biking, and active modes, and to mitigate increases in transportation costs to lower income Californians. Executive Order N7920 requires CalSTA, Caltrans, and the Commission to identify near-term actions and investment strategies by July 15th, 2021 to improve clean transportation, sustainable freight and transit options, while continuing a fix-it-first approach to our transportation system, including where feasible, building towards an integrated statewide rail and transit network consistent with the California State Rail Plan to provide seamless, affordable, multimodal travel options for all, supporting bicycle, pedestrian, and micromobility options, particularly in low-income and disadvantaged communities in the state, by incorporating safe and accessible infrastructure into projects where appropriate, and by supporting light, medium, and heavy-duty zero-emission vehicles and infrastructure as part of larger transportation projects where appropriate. CalSTA describes CAPTI as a holistic investment framework and outlines accompanying strategies and actions on how the state should invest billions of dollars of transportation funding where state agencies play a role in project selection or nomination. The investment framework, strategies, and actions help the transportation sector aggressively combat and adapt to the climate crisis while supporting public health, safety, and social equity goals. CAPTI maintains California's commitment to continue a fix-it-first approach to maintaining the state's highways, roads, and bridges. The CAPTI was publicly released on March 10th, 2021. Since release, CalSTA hosted a public workshop on March 18th, and the CAPTI was also presented on and discussed at the March Commission meeting and the April 8th joint meeting between the Commission, the California Air Resources Board, and the California Department of Housing and Community Development. The public comment period ends on May 19th, 2021. The purpose of these workshops. So, at the March 24th Commission meeting, Commission staff were directed to hold additional workshops to collect additional verbal comments regarding the CAPTI. As a result of this direction, staff scheduled 2 iterative public workshops to cover the implementation of the CAPTI in each of the 7 overarching strategies. Because of CalSTA and Caltrans' vital roles in the development and the implementation of the CAPTI, they have also been invited to co-facilitate these workshops. Today's workshop will cover implementation and the first 3 strategies, and the second workshop on Friday, April 23rd, will cover the remaining 4 strategies. The purpose of these workshops is to collect verbal comments, provide clarification of any specific strategy or action, or answer specific questions related to implementation or any of the strategies or actions. We are here to listen. We ask that if you offer a comment, please keep it focused on a specific concept and, if possible, offer a proposed recommendation. For instance, if a specific action is commented on, please elaborate on how you would alter the action or if you would request to remove or add action. There will be a segment at the end of each workshop to collect general comments. In the event that a direct question is asked or a request for clarification is made, the panel will do its best to respond in real time. However, it is possible that many questions will require additional deliberation between the Commission staff, Caltrans, and CalSTA staff before a response can be provided. The result of these 2 workshops will be a summary of findings which will be presented to the Commission as an information item at the May Commission meeting coming up next month. I would now like to introduce Darwin Musavi, Deputy Secretary for Environmental Policy and Housing Coordination at the California State Transportation Agency, and Jeannie Wardwaller, the Deputy Director of Planning and Modal Programs at Caltrans. They will join me as panelists who will be on hand to assist in covering implementation of the CAPTI during our first segment, as well as with responding to specific questions that may arise through the course of these workshops. We will now transition to the first portion of the workshop for discussion. CalSTA, CTC, and Caltrans will each give an outline of how they anticipate implementation of the CAPTI to roll out, and we will save comments and questions until after all 3 groups present. I will now turn it over to Darwin Musavi as we transition into the implementation of the CAPTI segment of our workshop.
Thank you, Matthew, for that introduction and the overview. And I just want to start off by thanking everyone for joining us today and for your continued engagement and input on the draft climate action plan for transportation infrastructure. And finally, thanks to CTC for hosting these additional CAPTI workshops this week. I just want to start off by reminding folks that we've put some of the early feedback we've received into action, and we've extended our public review period to May 19th based on feedback we've gotten from many of you on needing more time to respond. So wanted to make sure everyone has that updated date. It's also listed on our website. And as Matthew said, I just want to take a little bit of time to talk about our implementation efforts on CAPTI and what implementation will look like once we have a final draft in July and where we go from there. So as many of you know, CAPTI has been developed collaboratively through an interagency group made up of various state partners around the administration. If you look in Appendix A of the document, there's a designated lead agency for each of the actions that will be responsible for that action's implementation through its respective process and procedures. Because of the urgency of the climate crisis, many of the actions will be implemented as soon as possible within the context of the related program. So for example, CalSTA intends to implement the proposed TIRCP actions as part of the upcoming funding cycle that we hope to launch later this summer. For other programs with said guideline processes and updates, the expectation is that we aim to have proposed actions be considered within those guideline update processes when they begin. For actions that aren't tied to a specific funding program or timeline, we anticipate these actions to be accomplished on either what we're calling a short or medium-term time horizon, as listed by the specific action in the CAPTI Appendix A. So if you look at that appendix, every action is listed as short or medium-term. Short-term is designated as being completed within the next 2 years, and the medium-term ones are actions that will take longer than that. Several actions are initiatives that are already underway, and CAPTI is simply highlighting the effort as one that is critical and important to accomplishing CAPTI's goals. In terms of monitoring and accountability and progress reporting on CAPTI, CalSTA intends to leverage the state agency interagency working group that was established in creation of this plan as a forum to shepherd monitoring and implementation of CAPTI. We hope that we can continue to hold at least quarterly meetings to track progress and check in and document key accomplishments that will form the basis of an annual report on CAPTI implementation. And we also hope to leverage existing public forums such as the CTC meetings and the CTC CARB HCD joint meetings to provide regular progress reports on CAPTI implementation. So thank you. With that, thank you for joining us today. And I'm looking forward to hearing all the public comment and feedback. And with that, I will turn it over to Jeannie to briefly touch on CAPTI implementation efforts as it relates to Caltrans.
Thank you, Darwin, and thank you, Matthew. Hi, everyone. Glad to be here. Really excited to support this effort. Caltrans has been, as you both mentioned, been a part of this interagency working group and is very much committed to supporting implementation of this plan. We recently released our new Caltrans Strategic Management Plan. Hopefully you all have had a chance to see that. I think I just highlight it because I think it's very closely aligned with the CAPTI plan. So the department is, very much already committed to a lot of this work and moving forward some of the key efforts. I know we're going to get into the meat of discussing a number of the strategies today. So happy to comment on, work that Caltrans has underway. And I think particularly, obviously we're focused on climate here, but there's also a lot of work in the equity space and addressing those communities that we anticipate being most impacted by climate change. So that's an area where We're doing quite a bit of work. We really want to focus more going forward, working with CalSTA and the Commission. So things like the Transportation Equity Index, we're just beginning work on that now. That's one of the specific actions called out in CAPTI, but we anticipate, that being a key aspect of really honing in on those communities that are most disadvantaged from a transportation perspective, which will help inform how we're making those investments going forward. And also, working on establishing an ongoing advisory committee to really inform all of us on equity, I think is another key piece of engaging with communities, working differently and sort of uplifting those voices, those community voices that really have that expertise on equity. So I just wanted to mention a couple of those. Of course, our corridor planning efforts, our statewide plans also should be aligned, are aligned with this effort going forward. So I imagine we'll have some discussion on that as well. But just want to appreciate the Commission for creating the space today and look forward to hearing comments from all the participants. Thanks, Matthew. Back to you.
Thank you, Jeannie. I will cover some items for implementation of the CAPTI here at the Commission. So the CAPTI preserves that all actions denoting CTC as the lead agency would be introduced into the appropriate CTC program guidelines development process. The near-term actions that will be introduced in guidelines development workshops are strategies 1.1 and 1.2, which will impact the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, and strategy 1.4, which impacts the Trade Corridor Enhancement program. To elaborate, strategy 1.1 is to prioritize congested corridors projects to enable travelers to opt out of congestion. Strategy 1.2 is to promote innovative, sustainable transportation solutions in the Congested Corridors program by requiring multimodal corridor plans that align to the comprehensive multimodal corridor plan guidelines. And strategy 1.4 is to mainstream zero-emission vehicle infrastructure investments within the Trade Corridor Enhancement program. These specific actions will become agenda items for discussion at upcoming Cycle 3 program guidelines workshops and eventual consideration in the Solutions for Congested Corridors program guidelines and the Trade Corridor Enhancement program guidelines, respectively. As with any proposed changes to the respective programs, the CAPTI strategies will be discussed and vetted in our public workshops with the intention that the program guidelines will reflect the CAPTI actions that prescribe specific changes and ultimately be recommended for consideration when the Commission votes to approve each set of guidelines. During the course of the guidelines development process for each program, we will balance the trade-offs of these important state goals to ensure that changes are reflected in a way that makes sense for the program and are true to the nature of the related CAPTI action. Specific wording of each change will be determined through the guidelines discussion, as is every proposed change to the SB1 competitive programs. How projects get prioritized in the competitive programs is of the utmost importance. Therefore, this process will be handled with the same importance. Within the next 2 to 3 weeks, we plan on posting a schedule of initial workshops for each of the competitive SB1 programs. And in the lead up to the first round of workshops, we will post additional materials and agendas on each of the program's respective web pages. We are currently planning to commence Cycle 3 workshops in late August of this year, and we'll plan to hold roughly 1 program workshop a month for each of the SB1 competitive programs, leading up to guidelines adoption later in 2022. In regard to strategy 3.2, Commission staff will endeavor expanded, coordinated, and targeted technical assistance on each of the listed state transportation funding programs under our purview. In an effort to expand stakeholder access to Commission staff, we will experiment with competitive program office hours, which will provide potential project applicants an opportunity to virtually meet with Commission staff to ask questions about their specific projects. With the limitations of holding in-person trainings and workshops during the COVID-19 pandemic, the value of virtual trainings has really taken shape and will be utilized as a means to offering technical assistance on tools, methods, and practices for competing and participating in funding programs moving forward. As outlined in Strategy 3.1, Commission staff will work with CalSTA and Caltrans on the development of an advisory committee or committees focused on transportation equity and environmental justice issues. One important effort that will help inform this strategy is the Commission's Equity Advisory Roundtable, which happens to be kicking off tomorrow afternoon, April 21st. As outlined in Strategy 3.3, Commission staff will lead an effort to identify best practices for meaningful community engagement for inclusion into program guidelines. This is an ongoing effort at the Commission, and findings will be introduced during guidelines development so that potential applicants have a foundation of how to incorporate best practices into project development to be reflected in project proposals. Strategies 5.2 and 5.3, which relate to supporting climate resilience, are currently identified as mid-range strategies for now, and Commission staff will be involved in the implementation and delivery of these strategies moving forward in collaboration with CalSTA. That outlines the Commission's approach to implementing CAPTI actions, with the Commission noted as lead agency, and we look forward to working with stakeholders as we move through upcoming SB1 program guidelines updates and our Equity Advisory Roundtable processes. At this time, I'll ask that any questions or comments in relation to the implementation portion of this workshop start to be addressed. Okay. It does not seem that we have any comments or questions about implementation, so we will move into the strategy. The strategies of the CAPTI itself. Okay, so each of the following slides will outline each of the first 3 strategies and their associated actions. The information was derived from Appendix A at the end of the published draft CAPTI document. Again, I'll state that we will reserve a period at the end of each slide for specific comments or questions on those strategies or actions, with a general comment period at the conclusion of the slides. So let's go to strategy 1, please. Thank you. Okay, so strategy 1 is to cultivate and accelerate sustainable transportation innovation by leading with state investments. As you can see, these are all listed as short-term strategies with implementation over the next 2 years. I'm going to briefly run through each of the actions and descriptions to frame the conversation, and we'll take comments and questions at that point. So strategy 1.1 is to prioritize congested corridors projects to enable travelers to opt out of congestion. This strategy, or this particular action, aims to pursue an update to the congested corridors guidelines to further prioritize innovative sustainable transportation solutions. Innovative solutions should focus on reducing vehicle miles traveled and could include investments in transit, rail, active transportation, and highway solutions that improve transit travel times and reliability or generate revenue for vehicle miles traveled reducing projects. Strategy 1.2 is to promote innovative sustainable transportation solutions in the congested corridors program by requiring multimodal corridor plans. This action aims to pursue a requirement that all projects be a part of a multimodal corridor plan in consistence with the Commission's comprehensive multimodal corridor plan guidelines. Strategy 1.3 is to fast track new CAPTI aligned projects in early planning phases by adding them to the Interregional Transportation Improvement Program, or the ITIP. New ITIP projects that are in alignment with the CAPTI will be added with a portion of future funding capacity. This will be done in collaboration with local and regional partners and be in addition to the need to continue funding for existing ITIP projects. And the fourth action for strategy 1 is to mainstream zero-emission vehicle infrastructure investments within the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. This strategy, or this action, will pursue update the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program guidelines to prioritize projects that improve trade corridors by demonstrating a significant benefit to improving the movement of freight and also reduce emissions by creating or improving zero-emission vehicle infrastructure. So at this time, as you can see, each action is noted by lead agency, and we can take any comments or questions on strategy 1.
So we have one question, and the question's from Judith Borsch. And the question is, so where do you see the specific congested corridors to currently exist?
Where do we see the current existing congested corridors to exist? So that's a good question. And quite frankly, the state has several congested corridors, and I think that regionally and locally, any eligible applicant for the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, it has the responsibility of identifying congestion in terms to them. And so while we might expect interstates in Los Angeles County or in the Bay Area to be maybe what you consider the maximum of congestion, we all consider regional congestion in smaller or more rural communities as well. And so for that reason, I can't say that we define a list of congested corridors that would be eligible for this program. There are specific eligibility requirements to allow each agency to describe congestion as it relates to them.
So the next question is again from Judith, and Judith asks, and where are the mainstream zero emission vehicle infrastructure priorities? LA, San Francisco?
That's a good question, and I won't be able to answer that right now because the way that, and I'm assuming that it refers to strategy 1.4. And so the types of investments that would be eligible for the Trade Corridor Program will be identified through the guidelines development processes and through discussion with participants in the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program development process.
Our next question is from Stephen Hanamakai, and it's for strategy 1.1, bullet 2, is a high bar for rural and many suburban areas. With the office hours, does CTC and others intend to take time to better understand the details of the projects prior to the application deadline?
Christine, I'm going to ask you to repeat the last part of that question, please.
Yes. So S1.1, bullet 2, is a high bar for rural and many suburban areas. With the office hours, does CTC and others intend to take time to better understand the details of the projects prior to the application deadline?
Thank you. That is a really good question. And so I think the second bullet under strategy 1.1 will still need to be discussed in guidelines development workshops prior to what ends up in the final adopted guidelines. Now, when it comes to how different regions can apply and compete in the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, that could absolutely be a discussion that would occur during the quote unquote office hours that we mentioned. As I mentioned earlier, congestion is identified, relative to where the project is coming from. Obviously, we have, congestion in rural communities, we have congestion in urban communities. So I would say it would be important to be involved in the guidelines development conversation around how that strategy flows through to the guidelines, as well as utilizing opportunities to talk with CTC staff into how your project might be competitive in this program. I hope that answers the question.
So we have a question from Mike Woodman or comment. Concerned with the recommendation for fast tracking CAPTI aligned projects and early planning phases into the ITIP, the state needs to fund the corridors and existing projects with the limited capacity available that have not been completed, that agencies have been working on since 1998 before we talk about shifting priorities. Statute requires that 60% of the ITIP funds to be spent on the interregional roadway system outside of the urbanized areas. And if the state is truly focused on equity, these corridors that provide connectivity to rural, low income, and disadvantaged community needs to be completed.
Thank you, Mike. Do we have any additional comments to be read in or any raised hands to allow for verbal comment?
Yes, so we have 5 hands raised. I'm going to call them in order. So I have Kiana Valentine. I'm going to unmute you and you would be able to speak. So Kiana, you can speak.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Kiana Valentine on behalf of Transportation California. I have a question that pairs nicely with Mike Woodman's comments actually, and that is whether the state plans to identify and bring to the table new revenues in support of the SCCP and TCEP programs so that we can continue to fund the projects in the pipeline while also funding these priority projects that the state has identified.
Kiana, I'm assuming you finished your comment, but I will admit I was having a little audio troubles. Would you mind repeating the question, or unless Darwin caught it all, I'll let him chime in.
Thanks, Kiana, for the question. I believe, and correct me if I missed some of it, but I think the question was, does the state plan on working to bring new revenue to the table to accomplish the actions here in front of us? And I think also a couple of things. One is that the CAPTA in particular, as Matthew stated, based on the executive orders that we're implementing, was specifically an effort around prioritizing the existing revenues that we have around a certain set of projects. However, as we acknowledge in the plan, and we have a discussion on this in the plan, we think that these projects and the work that we're doing here align very nicely with the Biden administration's priorities in the American Jobs Plan, and that we do hope that with additional revenue, that the prioritization and the hard decisions that we have to make with the current revenue that we do have will become easier if we were to receive supplemental federal funding through future federal packages and initiatives if they came to fruition.
Our next comment will be from Kurt Brock. Kurt, I am unmuting you and you are free to speak.
Great, thank you. Kurt Brockke, OCTA, and thank you for the opportunity to comment. I did want to note that we have many projects in the pipeline and we're implementing our regional transportation plan, which is focused on greenhouse gas reduction initiatives. Many of those projects been in the pipeline for many years, from the project study report, environmental, and some even in final design. So I think it's important to keep those projects moving forward as we implement our RTP and accomplish our GHG reduction goals. As it relates to your question, Matthew, as it relates to 1.1 here, I would note that there are highway improvement strategies such as express lanes that improve transit travel times and potentially generate revenue for express bus services. But the way this strategy is written, it would preclude that type of an investment because of the potential increase in VMT associated with additional capacity. So I do think there's a bit of a contradiction in the way that this is written, because again, there are capacity projects that are complementary to the other goals you have in here. So there is a little bit of goal conflict in this one. I would just note that as a comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate that comment. I think you will notice in the first two iterations of the Congested Corridors program, we did in fact recommend projects related to express lanes, and certainly in project applications, you know, when revenue from express lanes or managed lanes will be complementary to regional transit or local transit, I understand exactly where you're coming from, and we would bring that conversation to the Congested Corridors development guideline development workshop.
Thank you.
Next, we have Sarkis. Sarkis, I'm going to unmute you and you are free to speak.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to Darwin and Jeannie and to Matthew and the CTC for these workshops that you're holding. We really appreciate the opportunity to provide this input. I'm Sarkis Kachek, the Director of Programming at the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments, and my comment is on Strategy 1.1. We ask that the state take a context-sensitive approach with how projects are determined for eligibility and for priority for those solutions for Congested Corridors program. Similar to Orange County, we have had a corridor that's been in the works for nearly 20 years, and we did a corridor plan with Caltrans to identify various multimodal options that are listed within the strategy. But we want to ensure that high occupancy vehicle lanes or managed lanes continue to be eligible as well as a priority, because once a corridor is completed, we see the full benefit, and that's going to allow us to promote people to get out of their cars either by carpooling or by having enhanced transit options within a managed lane. So we ask the context-sensitive approach be taken, and we look forward to participating in the upcoming workshops. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarkis.
Next, we have Michael Quigley. Michael, you are unmuted and you're free to speak. Can you check to see if you're self-muted?
There we go. Sorry about that. Thank you. This is Michael Quigley, Executive Director with the California Alliance for Jobs. Wanted to highlight a concern that I have about the state creating new additional project requirements and how that will interface with local transportation sales tax measures and voter approved expenditure plans. And I have a concern that, you know, as the state is now creating this shifting of priorities, and then saying that there is now a new requirement to receive some state matching funds for some of these larger capital projects, that could then exclude projects that are already funded through local sales tax measures, and that voters are expecting have already been taxed in some cases for, you know, for a 30-year measure. They might have been paying a tax for, you know, a period of decades, with the expectation that eventually this project will get built, and then if you remove the state funding partnership. So my question is, what will happen to the conflicts with local expenditure plans, taxation that was passed and approved by a 2/3 majority of voters with the expectation that the state would be a funding partner? How will CAPTI impact the delivery of those voter approved projects? Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Darwin, I will ask if you're able to respond. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for that question. You know, I'll say that, you know, I think obviously the impact will differ project by project, and you know, anytime we're talking about you know, prioritizing projects for state funding, there's always, you know, various winners and losers. The overall amount of funds we're talking about here obviously doesn't necessarily change. So it may mean that various voter approved projects that were lower on the project list for a particular county may move higher if they see a more open state partner on some of those projects, and then others might potentially shift lower. You know, but you know, ultimately, you know, I think we're already in a situation where a lot of county measures are having to make hard decisions in terms of what to prioritize, and all we're talking about here at the state is the types of projects that we would like to prioritize out of the suite of what local and regional governments are working on. So I think, you know, to answer your question, I think the impact will be varied, and it'll depend on particular projects, but it's certainly something that we're sensitive to and want to work with our partners on in terms of you know, how to work through those various impacts.
Thank you, Darwin.
Okay, the next one is from Jennifer Ward. Jennifer, you are, it looks like you're self-muted, so if you can unmute yourself so you can make your comment. Jennifer, looks like you're unmuted. You're actually, oh, there you are. Okay.
Thank you. Hi, can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. Hi. Thank you. My name is Jennifer Ward. I am the Senior Vice President of Advocacy for the Orange County Business Council. I appreciate the opportunity for additional comments today, and also just wanted to raise some of the initial concerns as well, that, you know, concerns over if the language in this strategy 1.1 is, could be changing the intent of SB1 funds. I think that, you know, the notion that travelers can opt out of congestion by choosing other methods of travel is not necessarily always going to work, especially in areas of high congestion, and wanted to have additional clarity that this strategy is not going to abandon the original intent of this program that would potentially address solutions for congested corridors with solutions that include adding capacity in areas where, you know, workers are commuting long distances, especially to keep in mind as the transition to heavier duty electric vehicles occurs. These vehicles can carry less cargo, so might require more trucks to move the same amount of goods, and again, additional capacity would be needed in that scenario. So just wanted to get some additional clarity on the intent behind the funding of this strategy. Thank you.
Thank you for the question or the request for clarification. I can offer a little bit of clarification, and I'll ask Darwin to chime in if he sees fit. But as you know, as far as I know, this particular action does not apply a prohibition on projects that increase capacity or that increase vehicle miles traveled. It's a motion towards better prioritizing projects that would be reducing vehicle miles traveled in respect to other criteria that the program will continue to evaluate. And so I think those are very valid concerns, and we'll look forward to discussing how this action carries through in our guidelines development process. Okay.
Okay, we have a question from Steve Bertable. Steve, I am unmuting you and you are free to speak. I believe you're self-muted.
Okay, thank you. This is Steve Bertlebow. I'm with the Transportation and Land Use Coalition of Sonoma County. Realize that as we're focusing more on reducing vehicle miles traveled and actually will have to have overall reductions, that's causing a lot of pain for people that have projects that are long in the pipeline. Question that I have is, have we considered converting general purpose lanes to managed lanes as a way of avoiding investments in widening roads that aren't going to be able to carry they're going to be empty if we reduce much VMT, and save money at both ends and make money because the lanes are managed. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment kind of slash question. I'll address it a little bit, and I can ask Darwin if he wants to chime in. I know that type of a project would certainly be eligible for this program. We have seen, and I believe recommended, projects with conversions to managed lanes in the past, and so I can simply say I cannot imagine such a project being not considered in this program.
Okay, I have a couple of more questions. So the first question is, would implementing these strategies involve moving money from an SB1 program in order to fund other projects?
Darwin.
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but the short answer is no. Several of these programs are SB1 funded or SB1 enhanced. I'll say for the programs that existed before SB1. There's no proposal here to shift funding between any of these programs or to implement any of these actions, I should say. There would not be a need to move funding from any other SB1 program to these programs.
Okay, next question. S1.1 seems to hint at price managed lanes with discussion around highway solutions that improve transit times, reliability, and revenue generation. Is there a reason price managed are not explicitly mentioned?
I'm assuming, that's in regards to the language, so I'll turn it over to Darwin.
Sure, yeah, happy, since it's about the specific wording of the language, happy to take that one, Matthew. There's no particular reason we directly didn't call out the description of pricing here. I think there's been a couple of comments made on this, so I just want to clarify that we're highlighting the transit outcome that you'd get from those managed lanes. I think to essentially note that we think the importance of the improvement that you get out of those managed lanes that's really important as it relates to reducing VMT is that transit reliability and travel time improvement. But certainly can clarify further and directly call out that we are talking about price managed lanes, express lanes, things of that sort here. And to an earlier comment made about the potential, I guess, I think it was framed as a conflict with reducing VMT. I think that's partially why we're specifically highlighting the need for transit improvements to be part of those projects. I think, and this is something that will certainly be up to the CTC in terms of what implementation looks like and their guidelines process as they move forward. But I think the idea here being that we'd like to start getting a little bit more nuance in terms of talking about the benefits of these projects and or in particular after, how do we improve transit with our highway solutions, which, as you pointed out, can include priced managed lanes. So hopefully that helps clarify a little bit.
Okay, we have another question or a comment, excuse me, from Steve Smith, San Bernardino County Transportation Authority. In Strategy 1.1, Bullet 2, I would suggest adding reference to shared ride, virtual travel, and other TDM solutions. These are important and cost-effective investments for urban and rural areas alike. This comment may also apply to other CAPTI strategies. Thank you. I have one more comment. I see, Kiana, that you have your hand raised, so I am going to unmute you and you are free to speak.
Thank you. Kiana Valentine, Transportation California again. I wanted to follow up on a question related that an earlier participant raised about whether CAPTI in Strategy 1.1 or 1.4 moves SB1 dollars for different purposes. And I agree with Darwin's response that it doesn't necessarily take money in these two strategies from one place and puts them in another, but it does, from my perspective, change the eligible uses and where funds are prioritized. So it will have an impact on the types of projects that are funded than as SB1 was authorized and passed in 2017 from my perspective. So I want to make sure to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have one more. Let's see, we have two more questions. So the first question goes back to Judith. Judith, she had a couple of questions. This one is asking, can you clarify examples of congested corridors that represent top 5 areas?
Sure, I will try to, based on, I believe there were some identified with the passing of Senate Bill 1. And I might ask Darwin if he's familiar with them as well. I know that one of the congested corridors is the US 101 on the San Francisco Peninsula between San Mateo and Santa Clara. I know that there is at least one or two of these corridors that are also identified in the statute in the greater Los Angeles and Orange County area, as well as in the San Diego area, I believe on Interstate 5 and Interstate 405. So those are the congested corridors, I think, as kind of the idea of a congested corridor from the passing of Senate Bill 1 back in 2017.
Okay, we have one more question, and this is from Kenneth Cow. Most managed express lanes are built as a new lane, thus creating new capacity. Will CAPTI also encourage the state to amend legislation to allow for taking a general purpose lane for managed lanes as another tool to achieve CAPTI goals?
Darwin, I'll turn it over to you for that one.
Sure, and I might see if Ginny wants to add anything on this as well, but I think this is something we'll discuss on the Friday workshop, but I think in particular the roadway pricing action that we've listed and the desire to create a working group around roadway pricing will be a great place to have discussions like this in terms of various barriers to using different pricing mechanisms, and they do kind of for giving an example of a key one. So the short answer is yes. I think CAPTI does provide the opportunity to have discussions on what we could do about some of those restrictions and barriers. I don't know if you have anything else on that, Jeannie.
I mean, not much. Those issues that are, require legislative change, I think are a little bit beyond the scope of the recommendations, but certainly we as you said, Darwin, like anticipate creating a lot of opportunities to discuss what those barriers are and work towards solutions. So appreciate Kenneth's comment. I think it's pointing to a challenge to us in converting general purpose to more managed lanes, which do help us better operate the system. So yeah, look forward to more discussion on that one.
Okay, we have one hand raised and it's from Jennifer Ward. Jennifer, I am unmuting you and you are free to speak.
Hi again, thank you. I just wanted to echo my earlier comment as it relates to S1.4 and just also say, again, we understand that the intent is not wholesale shifting of funds, but from a business and goods movement perspective, it is a concern of a policy shift that now is reprioritizing projects that just change from the original intent of the program that encompasses the broader goal of moving goods through California and shifting focus. Just again recognizing that we're all working towards the same goal of addressing climate change, but want to be able to have the business and private sector be able to efficiently and effectively move goods. Thanks.
Thank you for your comment.
Okay, we have no more comments or no more questions at this time.
Okay. Thank you, Christine, for assisting in the facilitation of that. So if there are no additional comments or questions, particularly related to strategy 1, we can move on to strategy 2. So I think for the ease of focusing comments or questions on each particular action, what I'll do in strategy 2 and again in strategy 3 will be to pause after each particular action so that the focus can be on that particular item. So strategy 2 is to support a robust economic recovery by revitalizing transit, supporting zero-emission vehicle development, as well as expanding active transportation investments. The first action under strategy 2 is to implement the California Integrated Travel Project. This will update the TIRCP Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program guidelines to support transit providers with implementation of contactless payment and coordination of services via Cal ITP. I'll pause briefly to see if we have any comments or questions for strategy 2.1. And I'm not noticing any, so I will move on to strategy 2.2. Strategy 2.2 is to identify a long-term strategic funding pathway across all funding opportunities to realize the state rail plan. Description of the strategy is to lead process to prioritize rail investments statewide for major state funding programs and future federal grant opportunities. Again, I will go ahead and pause in case there are any questions or comments related to this action.
There is one comment, and I believe it may be pertaining to this one. So it's from Steve Bertable, and it says, moving freight from roads to rails is a good way to reduce VMT, GHGs, and congestion.
Thank you for that comment. I am seeing no additional questions or comments, so we will move on to action 2.3, which is to accelerate the TIRCP cycles to support transit recovery with the deployment of ZEV transit and rail fleets in transit rail network improvements. Description is to develop new clean fleet equipment and network improvement project category in the TIRCP, and to explore allocation strategies to accelerate TIRCP cycles. I'll pause and see if we have any comments or questions. And I am not noticing any raised hands or comments, so I will proceed to strategy 2.4, which is to increase funding to active transportation program. This strategy is to explore potential for additional funding of the active transportation program from various sources, including flexing federal funds into the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, Transportation Alternative Set Aside, or redirecting funds from multiple sources. And I see some raised hands and some comments, so I'll turn it over to you, Christine. Thank you.
Okay, so I have 2 raised hands. The first is Kiana Valentine. So Kiana, I'm going to unmute you and you are free to speak.
Thank you. Hi again. As we've stated in previous CAPTI related forums at the CTC April Commission meeting, the transportation construction industry is very supportive of helping identify additional funding for the active transportation program and have submitted a letter in support of Commissioner Alvarado's request for $2 billion from the general fund to clear the backlog of ATP projects. That being said, we are adamantly opposed to any redirecting of existing funds, even small amounts from different sources, to support that program. We worked as an industry very hard to try to craft SB1 that provided funding for a variety of different programs, including, I think, a near doubling of the ATP program funding source. And then we also want to call attention to the fact that the Local Streets and Roads program, $1.5 billion annually, supports a wide variety of active transportation projects. I think at last count there was over 1,400 SB1 funded local streets and roads projects that had an active transportation component. And we want to make sure those get recognition as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Okay, the next one is from Cami Pierre. Cami, I am unmuting you and you're free to speak.
Hi there, Cami Pierre with NextGen California. Thanks so much for this opportunity to comment and looking forward to future involvement in comment period. As far as active transportation programs and increasing that funding, we are supportive, and NextGen California wants to prioritize a holistic approach to ATP solutions. So specifically thinking about safe and shaded routes that are critical for public safety, and thinking about urban forestry projects aligning with those at-risk areas where it's too hot to walk or bike or other forms of active transportation. And wanted to recommend the potential to maybe align these urban forestry and urban greening projects with some of the local core projects or the California Climate Corps. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you for your comment.
Next, we have Jonathan Matz. Jonathan, I am unmuting you and you are free to speak. It looks as though you're self-muted, so you can unmute.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody, and thanks for this presentation. My name is Jonathan Matz. I'm speaking on behalf of the Safe Routes Partnership. I hope you can hear me. I'm in a place where internet connectivity is a bit sketchy. On strategy 2.4, and also I wasn't able to chime in on the previous strategy 1. We're also, I think it goes without saying, very supportive of increased funding to the ATP. We're still, anxious to see the details of what supplemental funding could be retroactively plugged into Cycle 5 from the surplus that exists in this project. But we know as well that we need a permanent move of new funds into the ATP going forward for future cycles. Dumping a bunch of money retroactively into Cycle 5 may, inadvertently fund some of the lesser scoring projects, and doesn't really do anything to set up the program for future health and viability going forward. So we're very supportive of creative ways of finding out, of seeing where other programs could in fact support ATP, and we also know that While other SB1 programs have active transportation as an eligible use, that's not really what they're designed for, and we could see a lot more support for biking and walking infrastructure in a program that's specifically designed to support that. You know, so we really see the ATP as the only SB1 program that can guarantee that that kind of infrastructure is going to be prioritized. So you know, wanted to make sure that's in your consideration as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
The next one is Jennifer Ward. Jennifer, you are unmuted and free to speak.
Hello again, Jennifer Ward, OCBC. I just wanted to add that we also supported the directive from Commissioner Alvarado to seek additional general fund surplus budget for ATP. But again, wanted to just reiterate that as it relates to the implementation of this plan, you know, we have a priority to protect the original intent of SB1 funding and not lose focus on other programs and projects, as I mentioned already, to support the efficient movement of people and goods and relief of traffic that have greater impacts on GHG reductions. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
The next one is Mike Woodman. Mike, you are unmuted, or it looks like you're unmuted and free to speak.
Thank you, Mike Woodman, Chair of the North State Super Region. The North State Super Region also does not support redirecting funding from existing programs, funding programs to the ATP. We do, however, support the one-time effort to infuse funding into the ATP through the general fund surplus. One source of ongoing funding to increase funding to the ATP program that the administration should consider would be potential funding from cap and trade. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment, Mike.
Next comment is from Rachel Murakami. Rachel, you are unmuted and free to speak.
Good afternoon. Thanks for hosting. Rachel Morconi from the Santa Cruz County Regional Transportation Commission. Our board is very supportive of the active transportation program and increased state funding for bicycle and pedestrian projects, especially related to safety, and that will help us achieve some of our VMT reduction goals. That said, we would be very concerned if any of the increase in funding were to come from existing programs. We also really recommend the state and CAPTI maybe look at some of the other programs that exist beyond ATP that also support bicycle and pedestrian projects, and supporting adding funding to those programs for bikes and peds. That might include things like the shop, and especially where the state highway serves as the main street for a lot of communities. The Highway Safety Improvement Program has a small amount of funding available for really simple pedestrian safety improvements right now, and it'd be great to see that increase in the HSIP program. And there's just a few other programs, you know, locally our agencies use HUDA a ton, and our STBG and STIP funds to also support bike and ped projects, and we wouldn't want to see any of those opportunities, especially through formula fund programs, to disappear, which we're dependent on.
Thank you for your comment, Rachel. I think your comment was finished, so acknowledged.
And we have some questions. So the first one is from Judith Borsch. Is funding available to meet the strategy 2 actions?
I will turn it over to Darwin to chime in.
Thanks for that question. You know, I guess putting aside the action that calls on specific increase of funding, which I think inherently there's our acknowledgement that there isn't enough funding for the ATP program. in terms of the other 4 actions, listed here, I think certainly implementation of each of these could be a lot more robust if we had additional funding, which is why CAL's just committed to working with CTC and Caltrans and other partners across the state to advocate for increases of funding for various programs through federal transportation reauthorization and stimulus packages in particular, as well as other opportunities as they may arise. But the actions listed here are essentially framed at working within the existing funds that we have to focus on some of these efforts. So, for example, with 2.3, we're talking about how do we further support ZEV fleet deployment within the existing TIRCP program, which currently does fund ZEVs, but we want to create a new project category to make it easier to do so, make it more accessible for folks to do so, and be as supportive as we can as transit agencies try to make that transition. So I hope that helps clarify your question.
Okay, next is a comment from Hillary Blackerby. Please make the TIRCP scoring and allocation process more transparent. It's a bit of a black box to applicants. Next is a question from Michael Pimentel. Question regarding 2.3. Can you better specify intent behind TIRCP cycles? I believe in other forums, state has stated intent to bring funding availability online sooner, but are there other strategies contemplated?
Darwin, I will turn it over to you for response.
Thanks, Michael, for that question. And you're right that I think the strategy that we have talked about is essentially as listed here, accelerating the existing stream of funding, understanding the transit agencies, given the position that they're in now, some of that, particularly as it relates to things like ZEV fleet deployment, can be really helpful now as they look to come out of recovery. So that is the strategy that we're talking about in terms of bringing those funds to the table that we have, that we've been contemplating.
Next is a comment, and this is from Stephen Breiterball. In many places, most trips are less than 3 miles in length. Shifting driving to walking of cycling can have a significant effect on health and reduce congestion and GHG emissions. Next is a question from Shelby Ela. Will the passage of the CAPTI framework change the amount of pass-through money given to local agencies? Will it change what that money can be used for?
Thank you for the question. I know that I'm assuming that it's in reference to the entire CAPTI framework. So Darwin, I'll turn it over to you in case you wanna field it.
Sorry, could you repeat the question one more time? I think I missed the very beginning of it.
Yes. So, will the passage of the CAPTI framework change the amount of pass-through money given to local agencies? Will it change what that money will be used for?
No, it is not the intent of CAPTI to change any of the formula dollars or money that's passed through the state. This is specifically around the prioritization of state competitive programs and dollars that the state directly controls. In terms of prioritization of those dollars, that's obviously at the discretion of those. Will continue to be at the discretion of those local agencies to prioritize that money how they see fit.
Okay, thank you, Darwin. And I'm not seeing, oh, okay. Thank you, Christine.
So we have some more questions and comments that have just came in. So the first one is from Julia Randolph. Julia Randolph with the Coalition for Clean Air. I want to echo comments made by Jonathan Matt about supporting this strategy. Also voice my support for strategy 1.4 of developing a zero emission freight transportation system through mainstreaming zero emission vehicle infrastructure with the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. We can follow the policies of SB1 and implement the CAPTI strategies outlined here. The next question is from Andrea Arjona. Have you considered reserving funding specifically for quick build active transportation projects to achieve timely safety mode shift results?
Thank you for the question. I will turn it over to Darwin to see if that's been considered in the framework.
Matthew, I think, I don't know if I understand the question correctly, but I was wondering if you could talk about the quick build projects that CTC has prioritized within the existing ATP. But, I guess in terms of further prioritizing those types of projects, I think our action here is specifically about overall increasing the ATP pot. Certainly open to recommendations on how to prioritize additional funds. If folks have particular ideas, we're open to those, but I'll turn back to you on some of the particulars of the existing program.
Thanks, Darwin. I am not our active transportation program expert, but I do believe that Lori Waters is on in the event that she wants to chime in regarding our quick build pilot. So Lori, if you are on, go ahead and raise your hand. But I can say that with cycle 4 of the active transportation program, the commission did entertain a quick build pilot, and I believe I saw a raised hand. I just want to make sure that was Lori. Okay. Has Lori been on to chime in?
Okay. Can you hear me, Matthew?
Yes, Lori, we can hear you. And I appreciate for you jumping on. This is feeling a little bit like a traditional workshop where staff can chime in when they're the subject matter expert.
So the question was on the quick build pilot program. What was it specifically?
So it says, have you considered reserving funding specifically for quick build active transportation projects to achieve timely safety mode shift results?
Oh, so we had a quick build pilot program in this cycle and funded I think 6 projects, and it went pretty well. We plan to make some improvements and continue that, and we'd like to continue funding quick build projects in the next cycle as well. I hope that answers the question.
I believe it does. Thank you, Lori. And if there is a follow-up, the asker will type it in and we will bring you back. Christine, were there additional questions? Okay, so we will move on to the last action under strategy 2, which is to convene discussion on sustainable rural transportation solutions. This will convene discussion to explore actions CalSTA can take to advance rail, transit, active transportation, and zero emission vehicle deployment in rural communities. And I'm not seeing any questions or comments related to that specific action. I do see one comment come in for, I believe, action 2.4. So Christine, I'll ask you to speak that into the conversation.
Yes, so there's one comment from Kathy Dervin. We strongly support expanded funding for active transportation programs. As a climate advocacy group, we support an aggressive program to transform local transportation, land use, and public transit, along with more walkable, bikeable communities. Growing climate impacts are going to require us to make ongoing changes to our land use and transportation systems. Walking and biking has enormous health benefits by promoting physical activity and can help reduce chronic disease related to sedentary transportation patterns. We have seen a resurgence of walk-bike rates corresponding to COVID concerns. We should build on that. Please commit to maximizing ATP.
Thank you for your comment.
We have one more comment from it's from Anna, from City of Los Angeles, Streets LA, Anna Tubala Rudy, regarding Strategy 2.4. Please consider funding green infrastructure to include not only trees for continuous shade corridors, but stormwater management as part of active transportation projects to reduce runoff pollution and manage storm events. This will encourage biking and walking and make holistic projects.
Thank you for your comment. Okay. And seeing no additional hands raised or questions in the chat function, why don't we proceed to strategy 3? So strategy 3 is to elevate community voices in how we plan and fund transportation projects. Again, I will go through each action and take a pause in case any hands raised or we receive any comments or questions in the chat function. Action 3.1 is to establish transportation equity and environmental justice advisory committees. This is to establish advisory committee or committees focused on transportation equity and environmental justice issues stemming from transportation planning and programming, to coordinate with other state agency advisory bodies, including but not limited to the Commission's Equity Advisory Roundtable, the Air Resources Board, EJAC Committee, or the California Energy Commission, CPUC, the Public Utilities Commission, Senate Bill 350 Disadvantaged Communities Advisory Group. Forgive me for the initialisms and acronyms that we had without spelling them out. And to designate staffing and resources to support the committee's work. So do we have any questions or comments on strategy 3.1? We do, okay.
So it's not for strategy 3.2. However, this is regarding, it's from Stephen Hanamakai, and it's regarding S2.5. The Transportation Development Act financial penalty for transit operators that don't achieve annual mandated fare box revenue to operating cost ratios make it difficult to expand transit services in rural areas to a level of convenience that competes with SOV travel. Will CAPTI offer an opportunity to amend the TDA to get rid of the fare box penalty or replace the fare box ratio requirement with another metric to make transit service expansions more of a possibility and reality in rural and suburban areas?
Thank you. Were there any other hands or comments before we proceed to 3.2? There were, okay.
So there's one hand raised. It's Mike Woodman. I am unmuting you and you are free to speak.
Thank you. This is Mike Woodman, Executive Director of the Nevada County Transportation Commission and Chair of the North State Super Region. Generally we support the actions recommended in this section, but it's important to stress that as a state, while we focus on equity in transportation planning and funding decisions, we need to ensure that there's a focus on geographic equity across the state, which includes rural representation. Many rural areas in the state are economically disadvantaged and depend on interregional connections as well as multimodal options. And the CTP 2050 and the ITSP update and state policy and funding decisions going forward need to acknowledge and address this issue to ensure meaningful engagement. The impacts of state policies and the lack of funding programmed in rural regions for far too long have been an afterthought without meaningful upfront engagement. And it's important and critical that rural regions that are disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged, are considered in these discussions. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Mike. Do we have additional? We do, okay.
Next, we have Jennifer Ward. Jennifer, you are unmuted and free to speak.
Hi again, thank you, Jennifer with OCBC. I just wanted to add that regarding new committees or conversation around transportation equity, because transportation is so intrinsically linked to housing and jobs, I just wanted to request that representatives from those industries be included in that conversation as well to inform and have a more robust and holistic equity conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
So we have another, looks like we have a question from Warren Whitaker. Can you clarify the destination for input from the Strategy 3.1 advisory committees and the input to CTC, CalSTA, and Caltrans?
Christine, I missed the last part of your question, and I'm gonna ask Darwin to chime in if he can. Can you repeat the last part of the question?
Yeah, so it says clarify the destination for input from Strategy 3.1 advisory committees. Input to CTC, CalSTA, and Caltrans. And I believe that's the question.
Okay, so I think it's what avenues will the potential public have at contributing towards the committees, if I'm characterizing that appropriately.
That's belief. So if they don't, they can chime back in.
So Darwin or Jeannie, I'll turn it over to you.
Did you want to start on this one?
Sure. I mean, I maybe I misheard the question, but I thought what I understood is what input would the committee have to the agencies? And in which case, what we've discussed with this action is that the committee would inform all three agencies, and that we would sort of coordinate the staff work and the support to the committee from all three of our agencies, CTC, CalSTA, and Caltrans, as we've discussed it at this point. I think that this is one that is forthcoming, so we certainly are open to input.
Okay. Thanks, Jeannie. And if that was the appropriate characterization of the comment, otherwise they can type it back in. Did we have additional hands raised? I think we do.
Yes, we have a comment, and this is from Naila Pope Harden. Regarding 3.1, we greatly appreciate the work the CTC has been doing towards promoting equity. This is something that should be happening across agencies. We support this strategy and encourage pushing further to give this committee power to enact change. We have two hands raised, so I'm going to call on James Martling. James, you are, we can't unmute you. Okay, looks like you don't have your audio set up. So I'm gonna go to Jennifer Ward. You are unmuted, and it looks like you're self-muted. So you are free to speak.
Sorry, I have one for 3.3. I think I clicked too fast.
Okay, we will revisit her comment after we cover 3.3. And I'm not seeing additional comments or questions for 3.1, so we'll proceed to, there is one hand raised. Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have a hand raised from Mark Watts. Mark, you are unmuted and free to speak.
Great, thank you very much. I just have a question about the last bullet on 3.1 where it talks about designate staffing and resources. Has there been any preliminary work on what the cost is going to be for this, these committees and the inter-agency coordination? I asked the question because there has already been one piece of legislation introduced that sought to dedicate a portion of the SB1 that goes to SHOP to be dedicated for similar activities. And it seems like if you're going to be doing something that's transportation wide, it need not lean entirely on the back of or the shoulders of SB1. It's more of a comment than a question.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for the comment.
It looks we have Jennifer Ward. Did you have another comment or question? I see your hand raised. Okay. Okay.
We'll hold off. Yeah.
Yes.
I'll proceed to 3.2. So strategy 3.2 is to strengthen and expand coordinated, targeted technical assistance on state transportation funding programs. Caltrans will evaluate existing technical assistance, their existing technical assistance portfolio and identify opportunities for targeted expansion. Caltrans will cultivate partnerships with and build capacity of community-based organizations and residents to engage in the SHOP and the ITIP project development. And CTC, it will provide ongoing technical assistance to applicants on tools, methods, and practices required for CTC funding programs. And the commission staff will also explore structures for ad hoc in-house technical assistance for program applicants. And at this time, I do not see any hands raised or any comments. So we will proceed to strategy 3.3. Strategy 3.3 will be to lift up and mainstream community engagement best practices. Caltrans will create a community engagement playbook for planning and project development work. Caltrans will review existing programs, processes, and procedures to identify opportunities to strengthen community engagement. Caltrans will explore leveraging existing contracts to strengthen partnerships with community-based organizations. And the CTC will host workshops to identify best practices for meaningful community engagement for inclusion in program guidelines. And at this time, I do see a hand raised. Okay.
It's hands raised from Jennifer Ward. I am going to unmute you and you are free to speak.
Thank you. I just, again, wanted to, as it relates to future community engagement, just to advocate that a more direct engagement with the business and industry community be incorporated as part of this community engagement plan, especially as it relates to future discussions about project funding and prioritization. You know, this is the organizations representing the sector of the economy responsible for moving goods and housing people. We just want to request that that be incorporated as part of this process, which we feel was not as done as well as it could have during the development of the CAPTI. So just wanted to note that going forward. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. I do believe we have additional hands raised. Oh no, okay. We will proceed to strategy 3.4, which is to develop and utilize an equity index to assist in evaluation or prioritization of Caltrans projects. Caltrans will develop an equity index tool to assist in the evaluation of their projects and develop and roll out training to Caltrans staff on utilizing this equity index. And I am not seeing any particular comments or questions in relation to strategy 3.4. And so at this time, that does cover each of the strategies that we wanted to cover in our first workshop. We will be turning it over to a general comment period, questions and comments or general comments at this time. And you can comment by either typing it into the chat function or raising your hand. We will start off by some of the raised hands.
So I'll start with Kurt Broch. Kurt, you are unmuted and free to speak.
Thank you. Matthew, I just wanted to thank you and Darwin and the other staff for hosting this workshop, and appreciate your on-the-fly response to many of the questions that were asked. I did want to reiterate how an agency like OCTA is essentially implementing our regional transportation plan, our sales tax measure, and we're doing that through a multimodal program of projects, all the way from express lane projects to rapid bus lines to funding bikeway improvements to our own environmental program, which is focused on preservation of sensitive properties. So I think the scope of the efforts that we have committed to as part of our RTPs is very important as well, and the fact that not all those activities are funded, and many agencies are relying on SB1 funds to fulfill those commitments. So we would just ask that you keep an eye on that as you're making any guideline changes. Secondly, we'd also just ask that you keep an eye on the legislative intent of SB1 as it relates to some of the programs in particular. The congested corridors program, I think, is important, and just kind of watching the legislative intent on that as well. And I offered some comments on that. And then I just wanted to offer one more thing, and it was really raised on the last point, and it's on community involvement. Part of the community includes those that commute long distances to higher paying jobs from potentially low and moderate income areas. And I think it's important we don't lose sight of the fact that transportation improvements to support those commuters is very important, and they're part of the public, and we should really acknowledge that connection as well. So again, thank you for the opportunity, and appreciate your time today.
Thank you for your comment. Really briefly, before we proceed to other written comments or questions or raised hands, I do want to state that if you were attempting to connect with your audio and were unable to produce a verbal comment or a verbal question, I would also ask that you refer to the chat function and type your comment or question in so that it can be read into the conversation. But we can proceed.
Matthew, to clarify, that's the questions tab, not the chat tab. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Kiana Valentine. Kiana, I am unmuting you and you are free to speak.
Thank you. And hello again. Thanks for a final opportunity to make some closing comments for this much needed workshop. Thank you to CTC staff, CalSTA, Caltrans, Darwin, and Jeannie for your time and efforts today. I want to close our comments today by saying that the transportation construction industry recognizes what the the state is trying to achieve through the CAPTI document. And while we may have disagreements at this time about the approaches taken within and the efficacy of getting us there, the ultimate goal is shared. And so I want to make sure that that is stated time and time again and from the outset. I also just want to continue to put a fine point on how important SB1 is and why the industry will continue to raise the maintenance of SB1 as it was passed in 2017. As everyone is likely aware, SB1, despite its historic investment into transportation, was only a half solution. We just saw the asset management plan released a few weeks ago, I think. I've lost track of the specific timeline, but that there's still an ongoing $6 billion annual shortfall to just maintain and rehabilitate the state highway system. There is tens of billions of dollars in unfunded maintenance, rehab, and safety work on the local system, despite SB1's investment. And so we need to work in a truly collaborative and inventive way to bring new resources to bear so that we can meet all of our SB1 goals that were just codified a few years ago, as well as make progress on the state's climate goals. The transportation system, surface transportation system, will never stop being the backbone of this economy. We recognize that the importance of mode shift for individuals to have choices, to be able to move about their communities that best serve their lifestyles and realities. But we move goods, we move services, we move farm to market. These things are going to continue to need robust surface transportation options. I think I also will continue to ask questions throughout this process about how this plan gets us closer to the goal. Nowhere in the plan do we see how GHG emissions have been quantified. What are the reductions that the state anticipates from implementing the draft CAPTI? And so that's something we hope to get answered going forward. And I think I'll probably have used up my 3 minutes, and so I'll reserve future comments for another workshop. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Kiana.
Okay, the next hand raised, I have Jonathan Matz. Jonathan, you are unmuted and free to speak.
Hello, thank you once again, Jonathan Matz from the Safe Routes Partnership. And really appreciate the opportunity to comment again. This is, I think, the second or third CAPTI workshop I've been able to participate in. And we just want to emphasize how critical an opportunity this is, in the state to start the pretty radical shift that we need to make. Not in order to just meet our climate goals, but to maintain, our state's livability from a temperature crisis, from an economic standpoint. And really want to, we see some admirable goals in this plan, but we want to make sure that it's paired with robust action. And we've heard a lot of statements today of general agreement from the goals, but a lot of reluctance to change the MO that we've had in the state for decades on end at this point. I mean, I would just hope that decision makers keep in mind that every project that we go forward with is locking into place certain conditions for decades and generations to come, and we should be cognizant of the impact of our choices in terms of the healthy life and community resilience of so many communities in future decades, and really kind of keep that in mind as we think about where we need to realign the investments that we've already made, or projects that we already have down in the pipeline, and think not just about is this an exact match with exactly what maybe was imagined as our transportation portfolio in past decades, and more sort of, is this going to enable us to meet our goals and to provide the health and resilience for generations to come. So I'll say that as a general note, and thanks again for having this workshop.
Thank you for your comments, Jonathan.
Our next comment is from Mike Woodman. Mike, you are unmuted and free to speak.
Thank you. This is Mike Woodman again, Chair of the North State Super Region. This is more of a general comment, but it also really applies to the strategies within Strategy 4. It's really critical that CalSTA and Caltrans recognize that while limited in number, the majority of the rural projects that add capacity are safety and operational improvements. These projects do not induce significant VMT growth and move us towards zero fatalities. These projects improve safety and mobility for automobiles and non-motorized modes. They also enhance goods movement on our interregional routes. They connect our rural economically disadvantaged communities to job centers and multimodal transportation options, such as the Capital Corridor trains. It's important to recognize too that the urban-based research on induced demand elasticities is not applicable to rural state highways. The factors that drive induced demand, such as congestion extending over long periods of the day, resulting in latent demand, congested parallel facilities, rerouting of traffic, viable, multimodal alternatives, and significant travel time savings are not present to result in induced demand. These are exactly the strategic capacity increasing projects that the state should be funding. Additionally, many of these rural areas do not have significant population growth or economic development opportunities adjacent to the projects, which can lead to induced demand. And most rural projects, due to our limited funding formulas, are typically only a few miles in length. And furthermore, many of these rural transportation projects, as I mentioned earlier, that are planned for the near term or already under construction, required a decade or more to plan, design, and deliver. And this is due in part, as I mentioned, to our small formula share of funding for each rural agency. Without the continued focus and partnership of interregional improvement program, Senate Bill 1 grant programs, our regional improvement program funding will not be enough to get these projects completed that are critical to these communities. There are other communities and regions in the North State Super Region that are very concerned about evacuation needs in the event of a wildland fire, and capacity improvements are needed to be able to facilitate those evacuations. So this needs to be a discussion that we continue to have with CalSTA, Caltrans, as well as the CTC, to ensure that there is a thorough understanding of induced demand and the applicability to our rural highway projects, and that we're not penalized and disadvantaged when these are actually the strategic capacity increasing projects we should be funding, because they're not inducing VMT, and in many cases are often reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Mike.
Next, we have Carlene Saxton. Carlene, you are unmuted and free to speak.
Thank you. Yes, this is Carlene Saxton for the City of Palmdale. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I have learned a lot and have enjoyed it. So the City of Palmdale, we support the goals and objectives of the CAPTI, and the City of Palmdale respectfully requests that the strategies developed and considered under the CAPTI include and expand investment and additional support and resources for local implementation of transportation demand management strategies. This would include continued investment in zero emission infrastructure, including the expansion of California high-speed rail system through the City of Palmdale to Los Angeles Basin, and the expansion of broadband to support enhanced telecommuting. In order for our city and our region to be more fully contribute to the reduction in GHG and additionally infrastructure investment, those are all needed. We look forward to partnering and look forward to continued engagement. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Next, we have Jennifer Ward. Jennifer, you are unmuted and free to speak.
Thank you again, Jennifer Ward from Orange County Business Council. Also, just wanted to echo that the business community and OCBC, we also share the underlying goal, which is to help solve the climate crisis. And it's good for all Californians and businesses and the economy to address climate change. But wanted to, again, appreciate CalSTA and the CTC and Caltrans response to our request for more opportunities such as this to engage in this process now. However, we feel the business and industry sector should have been more directly included in the beginning of this process and been part of the plan's development. In particular, reason for that in particular is that we don't have a lot of clarity or insight into the data and modeling that have informed this plan strategy, especially since it's an unconstrained plan. In our sectors and in the business world, we must constantly sort of reassess and adapt our operations based on current changing economic demands. And so it makes projecting out the next 30 years in an unconstrained process atypical for us. So we're, happy and pleased to be providing comments and feedback on the plan as it stands now in its current form. However, again, from our perspective, think that a more valuable next step in ensuring this plan allows our economy to rebound and gives us more confidence in its ability to not impact our ability to move people and goods throughout the state would be to take a pause and have an opportunity to look at that data and that modeling that provides the foundation of this plan, since we are not necessarily confident as it stands now that it produces a path for us to keep the economy moving. So just wanted to raise that here and say that, again, we're looking forward to participating in more of these conversations, but would appreciate the opportunity to have a better understanding of the early stages of the development and sort of what assumptions and inputs went into coming up with these strategies, and then have an economic or technical analysis of the plan that we could collaborate on to understand its impacts, especially as COVID has changed this, its impacts on the economic workforce and industry components of this plan. And then lastly, I just wanted to say that I know this will be part of Friday's workshop, but we request and just feel the need for more discussion at the state level and reflected in this plan, a better alignment between California's climate change and housing goals, since we do have a housing crisis and are far behind what we need to be in terms of building supply. I also just wanted to support and echo some of the previous comments from OCTA, our partners here in Orange County, as well as others who flagged the importance of focusing on the intent of SB1 throughout this plan. So look forward to continued communication and again, appreciate being part of this workshop today. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Jennifer.
Next, we have Matthew Baker. Matthew, you are unmuted and free to speak. It looks as though you're self-muted.
Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Good afternoon. This is Matthew Baker, Policy Director for Planning and Conservation League. I want to thank you for the workshop today. I want to restate, as I have at previous CTC meetings, PCL's general very strong support of the CAPD draft recommendations, and I appreciate the conversation about how these recommendations specifically apply to the CTC today. And I'm also very encouraged by the express commitment in Matthew's, introductory comments, the commitment of the CTC to consider these recommendations and the upcoming revisions and adaptations of the guidelines to CTC's various funding programs. We urge you to pursue that commitment in earnest moving forward. And it sounds like there's a lot of important work to do and a lot of important dialogue to be had in the upcoming guideline workshops. Figuring out how we turn the ship and shift our priorities, our funding priorities for infrastructure in accordance with our climate and equity goals is going to be difficult, but we know we have to do it, and there is a lot of innovation to be had and creativity that I think that can be tapped from all parties in this conversation. And in reference to some of the comments made by old projects that have been in planning for decades or as far back as the 90s, I hear the concern about those projects, and I know that there's a point of sensitivity, but I think that the CTC has to consider all these projects as they come online in light of the whole record and in light of the new evidence that we have and in light of the new laws and needs that have been identified for California to meet its goals. And that doesn't preclude those projects from moving forward, but it might require adaptation or rethinking or redesign for how they can move forward that can meet our goals. So I hope that those that are concerned about those projects can sincerely engage in this and in finding solutions. As a specific recommendation from PCO, we urge the CTC moving forward and these guideline revision processes to consider determining, specific VMT reduction targets or goals for, that would be in line with the needs identified in CARBs and the Air Resources Board scoping plan, to help guide allocation prioritization and also to be able to help measure progress towards those goals over time and the performance of the system. And then finally, I want to speak to strategy 3 to improve equitable allocation of state resources and to promote robust community involvement. I've been encouraged by the recent progress that CTC has made in their equity advisory committee creation, but there's so much more work to be done by the CTC, but also across agencies and across our communities, both urban and rural. And I just felt the need to emphasize that as much as I can, and I hope the CTC continues diligently in that path. I thank you for the workshop today, and I look forward to working with you moving forward.
Thank you for your comments, Matt.
Next, we have Michael Pimentel. Michael, you are unmuted and free to speak.
Thank you so much. Folks, it's Michael Pimentel, Executive Director of the California Transit Association. And just want to start off and acknowledge that as an organization, we are still continuing our review of the draft cacti. We have convened within our association internal working group that's comprised of agencies of all sizes, some operating in urban contexts, others operating in rural and suburban contexts to advise on our engagement in this process. Now, with that said, I did want to provide just some general comments today, and that begins with just a show of thanks to Governor Newsom, to the broader administration, for continuing to focus on the need to curb transportation sector emissions by really driving mode shift and by deploying zero-emission vehicle technologies. I do want to just say that we as an association do appreciate that the administration has centered public transportation as a key strategy for advancing these goals. and has outlined some clear steps for elevating transportation equity in the state's transportation investment decisions. Strategies included in the plan, particularly those under Strategy 2, speak frankly to challenges to bringing more transit riders on board and to accelerating the transition to zero-emission vehicle technologies that we ourselves as an industry have identified. Now, of course, given our ongoing review, alongside that diverse group of members, we are going to be looking at the very specific recommendations that are included within CAPTI, maybe providing some constructive feedback on how things can be better aligned with specific priorities that we have. But for today's purposes, just want to say thank you to the administration for starting this conversation and look forward to engaging with you all in the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Michael.
Next, we have Steve Bertable. Steve, I am unmuting you and you are free to speak.
Thank you, Steve Bertlebaugh with the Transportation and Land Use Coalition of Sonoma County. In working with local policymakers, I am recognizing how difficult it is to shift thinking from we've got to expand because we're going to have more and more people, we're going to have more and more cars, we're going to have to grow, to a mindset where we realize we've got to reduce vehicle miles traveled, and shifting from a gas tank to a battery to run the vehicle does not reduce our greenhouse gas emissions all that much, because there's an awful lot of embedded carbon in a battery and in a 1 ton or 2 tons of metal that run the vehicle, and in the roadway it runs on, and in the maintenance effort that has to go on to keep the road maintained. So it's a very tough assignment that you've got. I want to ask that we have a ongoing inventory of how our VMT is going, and that's becoming much more accessible with big data. We'll know from year to year whether we're meeting our goals to reduce VMT. We didn't reduce them in the last 12 years since SB 375 was passed, but we've really got to get going on it. And we need to recognize that half of the greenhouse gases contributed by the transportation sector come from trucks. So moving those trucks onto trains, or moving the loads from trucks onto trains, is a big, big part of the effort that we need to make. Thank you for your effort. I look forward to the meeting on Friday. Carry on.
Thank you for your comments, Steve.
We do have some questions and comments, so I'll start with the first one. What does it mean to accelerate the TIRCP funding? Won't the annual revenue be the limit to what can be spent?
Christine, I'm assuming this is in reference to some of the strategies in, or some of the actions in Strategy 2. So Darwin, do you want to address this?
Sure. What we mean by accelerating TRCP funding is, and this is a practice that happens in various transportation programs. I think the CTC does this as well, where multiple cycles or annual amounts of money could be grouped together, or in essentially one call for projects. So the idea being, let's try to get as much of the funds available in that program, which in this case with TRCP, a big portion of those funds are funded through cap and trade and come in quarterly through auction proceeds. Can we front load those as much as possible and get dollars out, knowing that transit agencies need them now?
Thank you, Darwin. We'll go to additional written questions or comments.
Yes, so the next question is from Joseph Stramalia. How will self-driving cars fit into CAPTI goals?
Darwin, I will turn it back over to you.
Sure, happy to take that one. Thanks for bringing that up, and you know, autonomous vehicles, along with various other shifts in transportation technology, obviously have the ability to greatly impact and shape the transportation future that we see. You know, I think there's various places where we're having additional discussions on AVs and their impacts. I believe there's some discussion in the CTP 2050 as well, which is some of the foundation and where the data that was used to essentially create this plan is based on the modeling and the projections of the California Transportation Plan 2050. So I think, you know, that's a place where you could find some more information about some of those impacts. But one thing I will say is that, you know, we know that with various benefits that autonomous vehicles could bring, that there's also the potential, if not mitigated for large VMT growth, if the cost of driving were to decrease, the time cost of driving were to decrease for an individual. So I think it makes something like CAPTI, you know, even more critical to really think about and think about how our AV future can fit into this. But yeah, thank you for raising that.
The next comment is from Kenneth Cow. On 3.4, I hope Caltrans and the state will also involve regional and local stakeholders in developing the equity index. The strategy is as it's written now, only includes state agencies as providing input in developing the index. The next comment was from Kathy Dervin regarding 3.2. I strongly encourage the transportation agencies involved in CAPTI to keep the growing climate emergency in sharp and constant focus. We appreciate the work that has gone into developing CAPTI, but feel we need to do much, much more to meet our 2030 and 2045 climate goals. In fact, we need changes today and every day as the decisions are made about transportation infrastructure, so we do not make our situation worse and add to the burden of GHG emissions from transportation. We have another comment or question from Warren Whitaker. Clarify how several of the recommendations to enhance engagement avoid duplication of efforts underway at the county and MPO levels. Often our agencies have more robust partnerships with CBOs and other partners than state agencies.
Thank you for the comment and the request for clarification. Darwin or Jeannie, not necessarily requiring clarification, but is there an idea or thought behind if this would be a duplication of efforts?
I can chime in on this one, Matthew. I think, you know, all public agencies, of course, interact with the public at different levels. And I think we really all have an obligation to understand the needs of marginalized communities. So, you know, our intent is certainly not to duplicate, but to partner with and, you know, enhance the our abilities to understand, you know, what's happening and what the transportation needs are in those communities. So we absolutely appreciate that those partnerships are very strong locally already, and we just want to build off of that. So I guess that's how I would respond.
Thank you, Jeannie. And I believe that covers all of the hands raised and all of the comments or questions that were written into the question function. Forgive me for referring to it as the chat function. So So at this time, I will say that that will conclude our general public comment for the first session. And I want to thank you all for participating in our CAPTI workshop today. I want to remind everyone that we plan on covering strategies 4, 5, 6, and 7 when we meet again this Friday, April 23rd at 1 p.m. You can find an agenda and a sign up for that workshop on the Commission's website. And I also want to note that we do plan on posting a recording of this workshop to the Commission's YouTube channel so that it would be viewable after this fact. It will take a few days, I believe, to get uploaded. So you will not see it immediately. And then I also turn to the next couple of slides, which will contain the contact information of the panelists that you heard from today. Again, you heard from Darwin Musavi at CalSTA, myself here at the Commission, and with Jeannie Ward-Waller at Caltrans. And I believe the next slide does have the websites for each of our respective agencies. So again, I just want to thank you all for participating today. And we will look forward to seeing you all again on Friday.